Hey everybody, welcome to Improv FAQ at Length. This is a series of longer conversations about improv topics that have lots of questions surrounding them. And we're so excited to have Dan Izzo joining us for this conversation. Hey, Dan.
Hey, Dan.
Hey, guys.
Yeah.
Hey, Bob. Hey, James.
So good to see you.
So,
You as well, guys.
yeah, I feel like I'm just so geeked to talk because on the topic of improv topics that have lots of questions surrounding them, I feel like the Improv Inferno, which is a theater that you owned in Ann Arbor, is such a cool segment of Metro Detroit improv history, and it's something that I missed out on. You know, I came into improv in 2009, so it was shortly after Second City Detroit, after it had moved to Novi and then closed down. Go Comedy was just getting started. Inferno had also closed down, and so there's all this these stories and these improvisers that I admire that came up through those programs and those theaters, and it just makes me miss out on it. And I love to talk about it and hear about what was going on before I got started with improv. So I was hoping that we could talk about the story of the Improv Inferno and the unfortunately short amount of time that it was up and running, and then talk about your philosophy, Dan, because you've also made a huge impact on me as an improviser. And
on many of us. I mean,
yeah,
we've only been doing these conversations for about 2 weeks, and your name has come up so many times.
Well, thanks.
You left a really great echo in the community, so
yeah.
Well, that's
I
good.
hope you know that.
At least I did something.
Well, cool. So where does the story of the Improv Inferno begin for you, Dan?
You know, I want to throw one caveat out there about talking about the Inferno,
Yeah.
which is we have benefited greatly over time from the James Dean effect. Okay. You know, we were taken out early in our life before we had a chance to fuck anything up.
Yeah, fair enough.
So there's everyone's like, oh, that place, it burned like a bright comet, and then it was gone. Like, yeah, it's all right, you know.
Fitting for the Improv Inferno, right? It's just like,
much rather have that than all right, we're going into year 20, and we've really lost the thread.
Yeah.
If only you would have opened
which
the
is not a
improv
slight
plateau.
at anybody. I think the people who have been going for a while have been doing a great job of it, but you know.
But you don't get a chance to hit that down curve or whatever it is. So.
Yeah, it was all up curve and explosion at the end.
Yeah. So do you know where it starts? Like could you pinpoint where the beginning of it really is?
Yeah, ironically, I was at a Christmas party in Chicago at a theater, and I'd always thought about opening my own place, just kind of for the DIY aspect of it. But at that particular Christmas party, I was like, yeah, this is what I want. I want to kind of build my own community. Because, it was like one of those theater Christmas parties where everybody who's an improviser at that place was there. And I was like, yeah, I want to build that community somewhere. And like I said, I'd already kind of wanted to open a place, but that was kind of the real impetus, was to get me off my butt and get me doing it. Okay. So for me, it was always about, the thing I learned from being in Chicago, because I improvised in Chicago for a while. I did Improv Olympic, I did Annoyance, I taught at the Annoyance, taught at Second City, taught at Columbia College. And the thing that I ultimately realized is the best way to have a career is to create a career for yourself. If somebody won't cast you in a show, then come up with a show that you are the absolute perfect person to be cast in that show, or your buddies, so that's what, really having a good ensemble can really, generate that kind of stuff. But really it was about okay, I want to be the one who decides what goes up on stage. I want to decide what type of tone we're having. I want to decide, what the schedule is. There's just a lot of artistic decisions that I wanted to make that you can only make if you own the entire place.
Yeah. And what were some of those things that like when you first started thinking of what you wanted out of a theater for yourself, and the types of things that you could only do if you had a theater? What were some of those things, if you remember?
Yeah, a lot of it really is just being able to kind of layer a philosophy into an entire institution. When I was teaching at Second City, it was great. I mean, I loved it. I got to work with some fabulous people there. But at the end of the day, there was kind of an expectation of here's how we teach our classes. Here's what's important to us. Here's what's not important to us. Here's messages we want to concentrate on. Here's messages we want to stay away from. And so for me, it was like, I've just got this, despite my nerdish looks here, I do have kind of a punk rock aesthetic where I'm like, let's just do it ourselves. Let's just DIY it and figure it out.
Yeah.
And so it was things like, being able to take my friends and elevate them, being able to take, the improvisers around me and have a chance to elevate them. And again, I've got a particular style and a particular eye towards improv. And so the people who I thought were awesome were not always the ones that everybody else thought were awesome. And so owning my own place got me to be able to kind of craft a style of improv, even if it was for a short period of time.
Yeah, and then so you came up. You said you went through IO, Second City, and Annoyance, correct?
Yep.
And those are it's obviously a really great combination of schools. I feel like Annoyance is probably the one that might have resonated with you the most. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Yeah. The Annoyance, I mean, hats off to Mick Napier, and Joe Bill and Mark Sutton and all the folks who taught me over at the Annoyance and worked with me ultimately at the Annoyance. The thing, I'll give you a good story. All right. Okay. I normally have to have a few drinks in me for me to start storying, but here we go.
I'm so excited.
I was taking Second City, and I feel like I was taking all three at one time, or maybe I was taking IO and Annoyance pretty close to the same time. And we went in for the first day of level 2 at IO, and the instructor came in, and right away he said, I'm just going to tell you guys right now, I'm the best improviser here in the entire class. Like, I'm better at improv than any of you guys. And then I went to my Annoyance class the next day, and the next day was like Joe Bill being like, man, just enjoy yourself and explore your own creativity and believe in yourself and trust in yourself. Do whatever the fuck you want. And it's like, you could not have a more contrasting style of philosophy, which is, on one hand, and again, different strokes for different folks, but on one hand, IO was very much like, we've created a formula. Let's plug into that particular formula. We've created a philosophy. Let's plug into that philosophy. And the Annoyance was much more like, fuck it, what you got?
Yeah, they're like
that just appealed to me.
About, right?
Yeah. All right, if you can play. We're not about hierarchies. We're not about structures, although everything ends up with a hierarchy and a structure. But we're really more about like, let's just have fun. If we like being around each other, then let's be around each other and let's do creative things around each other. So all of a sudden, my creativity and my thought around improv went from, how do I comply with everything? How do I kind of mold myself into the box they're looking to fit me into? And it flipped to, how do I just get out of my way so that I can let my creativity flow and get in touch with my, my core of creativity. So
that's interesting, because like most Second City type learning experiences and students in those experiences do the same learning curve, but you happen to do it at the same time. Like you had like more of a Venn diagram than like a learning curve. Like, because I had the same thing. Because you start taking these classes, and here are the rules. No questions. No this. No this. No this. And you got this checklist in your head when you're trying to play. And how can you call that play when you got a checklist? Someone's telling you how to do the thing. So I like that. That's really cool.
Yeah, and to a certain extent, even teaching at Columbia, which kind of forced me to get back in touch with like the viola Spolin roots and that kind of stuff. Because I took over at Columbia College for Martin DeMott.
Oh wow!
Who unfortunately, he unfortunately had passed. He was sick and then passed away. And when he was sick, he couldn't teach his classes, and they reached out to me and they're like, "Hey, do you want to teach college?" And I'm like, "I guess." And so I really, tried to honor Martin by kind of going back into the Spolin work. And when you look at all that early improv work, so much of it is just founded in pure play. And, just trying to take kids who are kind of messed up and not feeling like they can express themselves and just giving them the freedom to express themselves. Yes and was originally an exercise, not a rule.
Right. Yeah.
And so it was fun to kind of get back to that and see where that all comes from.
Yeah, I didn't realize.
But yeah, it's
Martin DeMott is a legend of the improv community, and I didn't realize that was part of your story as well as taking over when he passed.
Yeah, I ended up naming my middle son after Martin. I got a son, Martin. So,
wow.
Yeah, heavy. You guys want to light shit? I'm talking about dead guys.
No, this is what we want.
But so when so you've been in Chicago, you've had all these great opportunities to develop your voice, and you realize that what you particularly want out of improv is something that is not strictly in alignment with any of the theaters, or that you would at least rather try to make a go of your own way. And moving back to Michigan and starting to scout out places in Ann Arbor, what was the thought process or the experience for you like at that point when you're like, okay, going to head home and I'm going to start looking for a place to put a theater?
Sure. Although to be clear, I'm actually from Chicago originally.
Oh, shit.
So Ann Arbor. No, that's cool. I don't expect you've memorized my biography.
But so go ahead.
So in Chicago, I really, I was teaching a lot and making decent money off teaching. I was, doing some improvising, and nobody makes money off of really improvising. I was doing some directing, and you can make a little bit of money off directing. But at the end of the day, if you're going to try to have like your career revolve around improv, you kind of have 2-3 paths at the most to pursue. One is as a straight up actor, and again, the improv actor thing, there's not a lot of money in being a pure improv actor. There's money in being an actor, but to just be an improviser, it's like the most money you're going to make is on Second City. And by that point, you're not really doing improv anymore. You're doing sketch comedy. Directing, obviously, you make some money there. Teaching, I left that one out. You make money there. Producing, where you kind of like, all right, we're going to rent out a barn. We're going to paint up some sets. That's where you can actually make some money.
Yeah.
It takes an investment of money, but that can be really where you make some money. So it hit a point where it was like half the time I was teaching improv, or probably 2/3 of my life I was teaching improv. The other third I was still working my law practice because I was a lawyer back then. And I got to a point where I was like, I need to just put everything under one roof. I want to like make my money off of what I love. And what I love is comedy. What I love is improv. What I love is like, what I really love is like seeing those people open, seeing those people blossom. That really, like, once I started teaching, that's when I was like, oh, this is my jam, is like taking people and elevating them. I never had any, I never quite expected that I was going to go too far as an improv actor. I mean, the closest I got was Jason Sudeikis and I both got shortlisted to be on the short list at the same time. So that was, and I did get an audition back in Chicago before they started Whose Line Is It Anyway? There were like 20 of us who auditioned for that as a big group ensemble. So that was pretty cool.
Cool.
Obviously did not get it.
But what an experience, man. That's gotta be wild.
It's crazy stuff. It was crazy stuff,
so that would be like when they were looking to do the American version. So you knew that it existed. Yeah. So like, is that the kind of thing where you knew the how big the opportunity was, and like, was there a lot of buzz around that audition happening?
There was definitely a lot of buzz around it, but the mistake that they made was originally they came into town, and I don't want to get too far off on the story, but originally they came into town and just hired straight up casting directors. And so the casting directors sent over all their comedic actors.
Oh, gotcha.
And the Whose Line people were like, these are not good. Like, how is Chicago so awesome for improvisers and this is the best we can get? So Mick and Kelly Leonard, from at least my understanding of it, it's been 20 some odd years now probably, Mick and Kelly got together and put together a short list of 20 people that they thought they should take a look at. And then they took a look at us and half of us got sent home after lunch. and I was in the go home after lunch crowd. But it was
That's still cool,
you
man.
know.
Yeah,
it was
you
real
made the
cool.
top 20.
It was real
That's
cool.
dope.
Yeah.
But okay, so
Yeah.
so you're at the point where you're kind of like hitting a limit with what you want to get out of where you're at, or where you feel like you can fully apply the things you want, and so you
Yeah.
start looking at Michigan, Ann Arbor specifically first for the theater, or did you kind of like think of some other places that you might set up shop?
So I knew once I got out of kind of the really hip areas, basically once you get out of your New York, get out of your LA, get out of your Chicago, you've got to put long form into some sort of context for people to kind of get it. I don't know that that's still true, but back then it certainly was. And the best context for that was Whose Line Is It Anyway and Comedy Sports. And so I took a look at Comedy Sports and look at their franchise model, and I almost bought a Comedy Sports franchise at one point. But again, I wanted more freedom. But I realized that Comedy Sports had done really well when they positioned themselves in college towns, because they were able to kind of continually crank through students. They always had new young kids coming into town excited, and they had the added bonus of those kids would leave, so you never had this kind of like build up of talent that was kind of blocking the way for your students to progress. And so I was like, all right, Madison, Wisconsin could be a good place, and then so I looked at Madison, Wisconsin, looked at Ann Arbor, and decided Ann Arbor was really kind of the call. It didn't hurt that my wife had family ties to the area, so that we knew that we could, rely on family if we came here. But at the end of the day, I felt more comfortable coming here than going to Wisconsin. And so I ended up picking Ann Arbor, and that's how we got started.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, it's smart thinking to. Well, first of all, I feel like colleges are really interesting for that fact, right? Because like the turnover is a good thing and a bad thing, and then also college, if you're planning to have a bar in the theater, college students hanging out don't kind of like keep your lifeblood going the same way that adult ass improvisers can for a theater with a bar in it.
Dull ass improviser.
But I really like get out of here, kids.
Something about that.
Can't even have a drink.
Get your adult ass out of here. This bar's for youngins.
I'm like, look, man. As a broke ass college kid, I was never gonna help anybody's business thrive like by just being around. I got no money to spend, but.
Sure, but college students love doing things like volunteering. Go hand out flyers. Hey, wear our T-shirt. Hey, now you're in this cool club.
Yeah, in it for the experience.
At the end of the day, I ended up not really benefiting from the college students in Ann Arbor, except very tangentially, because I ended up coaching the University of Michigan, one of the University of Michigan improv groups.
Okay.
And a bunch of those folks went on to be on main stage in Second City in Chicago.
Oh, cool.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, like John Hartman.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I'm trying to remember who else. I'm blanking now. Murdoch, Jeff Murdoch. I want to say Dan Schwartz.
Okay, cool.
Although I think I'm messing up his last name.
But okay, so that's the thinking is that you kind of want to tap into the college community, and I mean Ann Arbor is like a really happening place for a lot of things, arts and culture anyway. So there's a lot of reasons to set up a theater there. But so you set up, you find a place. Tell me about the physical space that you found. Where was it in Ann Arbor?
We were right downtown in Ann Arbor. So there's really kind of like two, although now probably three centers to Ann Arbor. There's one that's like the traditional right downtown. There's kind of a downtown that's on campus. And then there's like a newer kind of area that's forming a little bit out west from downtown, which is where Pointless, I think they're called Pointless. I can never remember the full name, but Pointless Theater Company. They're doing their work out in that kind of western part of downtown. Yeah. Yes. So our place was a bowling alley of a place. It had been a jazz club for a while. It had been a bunch of different things. Right before we moved into it, it was going to be a hockey themed bar. So like when you were standing on the floor, like the walls were painted white as if you were standing on the ice, and they had like a red chair rail around and all that stuff. So
Okay. And
So yeah, I mean the big challenge we had there was it was a huge space, but it was a narrow space, and so people would have to walk past the stage to go to the bathroom. That was a classic one.
Yeah.
And you couldn't get that many chairs in front of the seat. Like the most chairs you got were to stage right.
okay.
You know.
So
So it was, but we had it downstairs. We had a huge basement downstairs, and you know, so we were able to teach classes upstairs in the basement, and you know, we had just that kind of hangout space afterwards, where you know people would be sitting around till 1, 2, 3, 4 in the morning, you know, shooting the shit, talking about improv.
cool. So what were some of the first shows that you launched with?
So again, knowing that you had to have some sort of like game context around it, or not that you had to, but I really felt like, all right, I want to take the kind of the comedy sports, you know, game show format, and I want to try to elevate it. I want to try to like elevate it by bringing like a long form sensibility to it. I think the problem with your short form shows is they focus a lot on rule explanations and like what are they getting from the audience, and kind of there's a lot of like focusing on compliance, like you said 4 words instead of 3, and that's I mean that's all legit when you're playing a game, but I wanted the rehearsals and the focus to be bringing integrity to the scenes, bringing character to the scenes, more so than are you really good at the 3 to 5 word game.
Yeah.
And so knowing that I had to have that, I kind of started throwing some ideas together, you know, for a show. And I originally had this idea for like a team-based show, again, like comedy sports, where there's going to be like a team from heaven and a team from hell, you know?
Okay.
And I was like, all right. And I also, there had been this show, Remote Control on MTV back in the 80s. That was like a really fun game show.
Pauly Shore,
that had
I think.
Yeah, they had a big board with weird questions, and I was like, that's cool. I want to rip that kind of thing off. You know, so I ended up getting away from the team thing, but the heaven hell kind of thing kind of stuck around in the theme of the Improv Inferno. You know, everybody knows I've got like a fire tattoo, so that kind of drove me towards the Inferno name. And really, like, I had a buddy in Boston who started a place called Improv Asylum. You know, you had Improv Olympic. So I was like, all right, you know, if you improv plus a destination is, you know, going to get you what you need. So Improv Inferno seemed to work. But the funny thing was, like, I really didn't have the Improv Inferno name until we really made the move to Michigan. Up until then, I was really just focusing on creating the show so that we could have this kind of like core game show going on. Okay. And that's when I came up with the Damnation Game, which is what I ended up calling it. I don't know why the Damnation Game, like why that name stuck in my head or phrase stuck in my head. I only realized like much later that it's like a Clive Barker novel that I had read a long time ago.
Oh, really?
I thought Damnation Game just meant something to people, and it's like, no, only the people who have read a Clive Barker novel. So,
Yeah.
But the idea was like you play the game and like the improvisers are gonna play the game, and you know, as bad things happen, they're gonna be damned. You know, like things are gonna get progressively harder.
That's
we
funny.
eventually got away from that.
You're like, earning points to go to the good place or bad place. That's funny.
Yeah. I mean, at one point I wanted to have like uncomfortable chairs for the hell side and comfy chairs for the heaven side, and had all sorts of grand visions there.
That's cool.
Okay, but it's a game show, and
So what I did was I developed that. I produced that game show in Chicago. I rented a space, and we ran the game show for about 2 months. That let me kind of like work out the kinks. You know, I mean, we obviously had a long rehearsal process going into it. Had a great cast there. We went into kind of a rehearsal process, and then with the shows, it just really let us work out all the kinks and bugs with regard to the show.
Okay.
Dan, I hate to do this to you.
What's that? I'm sorry, Bob.
Can you name drop some of the people in the cast? Because I think some of the people who are listening to this aren't familiar with who started in Ann Arbor. You know,
my Ann Arbor. I mean, I originally had a cast in Chicago that, you know, those folks are all like out in L.A. and New York now and stuff. And they were a great group of people. Unfortunately, one of them's gotten big into QAnon, so that's sad. But improvisers are weird. We're a weird and cowardly lot. So my first cast in Michigan here was I'm not going to remember all the names. Mike McGettigan, Lauren Vickers, Kara Troutman, Johnny Victor, Brian Hatch, Joe Davis, Nick Smith was with us for a very small period of time, but he was in the original cast. Trying to remember who else I had. I know I'm leaving somebody out. Mark Soboleski. I do not want to leave Mark out because he was fantastic. And then I'm trying to remember the name of my original prize girl that I had. I can't remember her name, unfortunately.
Was it Katie or?
No, Katie came along much later.
Okay.
But yeah, Mike and Lauren and Kara. I held auditions without even having the theater. I held auditions. I just rented a space at University of Michigan, came down, held auditions. Okay. And we had everybody. I mean, Second City had closed, so we had everybody audition for us. People who had just been on the cast of Second City, including guys like PJ. PJ auditioned for us. Well, how am I forgetting Chris D'Angelo was part of the original cast? That's an asshole move on my part. Because Chris was fantastic, and he really grew into himself over the years in a lot of ways.
It's an amazing team. I mean,
yeah. Think about what all these people are doing now. Like, wow. Like, these are some of the
well, again, I think if you find the right people and you give them a bit of a philosophy and a lot of freedom, like the creative people all of a sudden get real creative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, we really like that original cast. So the Damnation Game was kind of the centerpiece show, and we were doing that. Originally, when we opened, we were doing it Friday and Saturday 2 times. Okay. By the end, we were kind of running different shows at the 8 o'clock slot and just letting the Damnation Game be at 10. And then the other kind of show that was a permanent fixture was the X Show, which was basically just our like midnight, I don't want to say fuck around, but our midnight crazy, dirty, go nuts show,
Okay.
I never like to think of improv as being sloppy or loose. I mean, improv can be sloppy and loose. I just think you're doing a disservice to yourself and the audience if you don't treat it seriously. So like I used to do this thing in Chicago called Improv Fight Club, which I shouldn't be talking about. But the idea was like we would get all these improvisers in a abandoned space and like Wednesday nights at like 11, and everybody had to perform. So there was no audience. But the rule was, like, if you were off stage, you had to behave like an audience. And if you were on stage, you had to play like there was an audience there. Because I think what you start seeing in some middle-aged improvisers, people have been doing it for a couple of years, have taken classes a few places, is they can start getting lazy and getting into bits and just kind of phoning it in a little bit, like relying on what works. And so, like, the whole point with the X Show was to kind of push the boundary. To get us out of our comfort zones, to get us into a place where we're, really connecting with a lot of raw energy, a lot of raw emotion, And so by taking the censorship lid off of that for the midnight show, that really allowed that to blossom.
Yeah. So it's it might be a little messy, but it's because you're pushing and challenging yourselves to make risky, bold moves outside of your comfort zones.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's not messy because we don't give a fuck. It's messy because we're really giving a fuck.
Yeah, I love that. It's got a mission statement to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for lack of a better term, it's like, I don't want to call it a rehearsal, but I can't think of another word to call it. A rehearsal in the sense that everybody's like learning how each other plays and actually rehearsing for yourself too, like pushing yourself. Like, oh, I can't do my go-to bit because these are all my friends. They've seen all my old shit. Time to step it up a notch. I love that challenge. That's amazing.
Yeah, I always wanted that X Show to have kind of an underground feel to it, where it's like, okay, now that the audience has gone home, now let's really fight. We put on
Mom and Dad are in bed. Time to play, kids.
Yeah, exactly. We put on the clean show. Now let's take the gloves off and beat the shit out of each other.
I love it.
So, I don't want to derail if we were going to keep building on the show path, but I do want to just say I'm now talking about this philosophy and play style, interested in like what you were leading with as a teaching philosophy for your class program? Like, what was the design for your training program in the Inferno?
So, definitely stood on the shoulders of giants there, in terms of just, borrowing a lot of the Spolin exercises, borrowing a lot of the Second City exercises. Originally, I taught the intro class and then eventually turned the intro class over to my wife, Trish, who is an improviser in her own right. And I also should mention she was part of our original cast.
I was just thinking that. I didn't want to call you out. I was just thinking that because I think she was the first person to ever play for me when I used to come watch. So
yeah. But really, what I told all my teachers, and it was something I learned directly from Martin, was you should try to have your students have a success every day. Every day they should have one moment that you point out to them where they were successful. Even if you've got to bend over backwards to find that point, because everybody has done something right that you can focus on that right thing, and that was my thing, is like, if you can find the good thing that they're doing and just focus on that, you can water that good thing without having to like pull the weeds by saying, don't do this, don't do that, next time don't. Instead you start saying things like, lean into that a little more, go farther with that, push that harder. That was great. Hold on to it. Don't let it go so quick. I'm saying don't there, but it's more of a, not you're doing wrong. It's like, man, you were doing great. And then you bailed on yourself. So trust yourself. Like, you're fucking brilliant. Keep pushing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that's something that is uniquely you, Dan, which is your ability to you're like an aggressive player. You're kind of no censorship, no taboo, and so there's this kind of I don't know. I would guess that somebody like that would be more like, no fuck around, like, that would be the way that they teach too. But you're such a nurturing teacher, and your style is really about empathy and building people's successes on a very core level. And I think that's a very cool thing to have those two sides that you can tap into. I think that is something that really shapes your philosophy and style, in my experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I tell my kids this all the time. The world does a good enough job of beating you up. You don't have to beat yourself up, right? The world will take care of that for you. And it's the same thing when it comes to improv, right? Like, try not to beat yourself up. The audience will take care of that for you. Your coaches will take care of that for you. Although, again, they shouldn't be beating you up. But it's like, find your core and start speaking to your core and believe in your core. Find your creativity and believe in it. Now, obviously that's not accessible or successful for everybody. So it's not like it's some sort of universal cure for, bad improv. There's still plenty of that out there.
Yeah,
but it couldn't hurt to try.
Yeah.
You love yourself and your shitty show.
If you spend most of your life doing it the other way, beating yourself up, why not try something new and give yourself some love? Shit.
Yeah. And I mean, when you go back to the notion that all this really is an extended form of play, and you think about a bunch of kids, if you said to a bunch of kids, play cops and robbers, the most discussion they would have would be over who's who. They would never ask you what the rules are. How do I play this game right? How do I play this game wrong? Like, they would just play, Yeah. And that's what I try to get into every improviser I ever work with, is just play. If you can just find that source of play within yourself, you're going to do a much better job connecting to your emotional center, connecting to your scene partner's emotional center. Your awareness will be heightened, and you'll be in this kind of like really good space.
Yeah. And you were saying that you started with you got Spolin. So you're starting with short form in the curriculum, or were you mixing in long form as well?
A little bit of both. One of the exercises I like getting into a class early on, which is more of a long form exercise than it is a short form exercise. Because if you look at a basic like level A or intro to improv kind of curriculum, chock full of games, lots of games. And part of that philosophy is just getting people comfortable being on stage. But the one that I would always make sure to drop in, and I would drop it in like really early, like first or second class, would be this kind of like, I would do countdown scenes. So I'd say like, all right, we're going to do a bunch of scenes that are a minute long. And everybody's going to do at least one or two of them. And then we're going to do a bunch of scenes that are 30 seconds long. And I wouldn't preview it. I would just say, all right, let's do some scenes. These are going to be a minute long. Okay, remember these ones that you've just seen. Now let's do some scenes that are 30 seconds long. All right, remember those. Now 15, now 5. And what that makes all improvisers hopefully realize, but especially like it becomes this real aha moment to beginning improvisers is, hey, that scene starts the second that scene starts. Like, I got to be ready to go then. I got to be at 100% at that moment. And they start to realize that it's just flipping a switch, that you just make a choice to be fully present right then and there. You don't think it, you just make the choice to do it. Because if you've only got 5 seconds, man, you got to commit. And ironically, like when you do that exercise with almost any group of improvisers, the 15-second scenes are the best. The 30s are pretty good. And the ones, they wander. They wander because I've got time to get around to that. And it's like, yeah, you got time to get around to that. But I mean, like, look at any action movie. It starts with some guy getting shot in the face. Like, it's not like, oh, let's go to the gun store. Let's pick out our bullets. It's like, boom,
we got you in there.
Yeah. I used to describe it to my Columbia students as like, with your first line of the scene, it's almost like you're taking a boulder, tying it to your leg, and throwing that boulder and just letting that carry you the rest of the way. Just like let that momentum of that first thing just carry you all the way through the scene.
And how long was the program? Because or was the training program meant to be? Because what was the full life of the theater? How long from opening to closing the Inferno?
We opened in September of 2004, and we closed in September of 2006.
Okay.
We did run kind of shows afterwards at another space for about a year. Yeah. And I really got to hand it to Chris D'Angelo because him and Katie Thomas both took kind of the laboring oar in making that happen. When we lost the physical space, my son had just been born. I kind of was at the point where I had to go back and get a real job for the first time in 10 years. I had lost my smile, so to speak. I was not in a position to keep the place going for another year, but we did have the opportunity. And, I was like, all right, Chris, let's make this work. Yeah. So, but like the core of Improv Inferno was 2004 to 2006. It was almost exactly 2 years.
Okay. And so during that time, were you able to do a full run of a program? There were people that graduated the Inferno program. How long was the course?
Yeah, so we did a 6-week class cycle because I always found like 8 weeks was a little too long.
Okay.
I also kept the classes down to 2 hours just so that you're not trying to jam filler into them.
Gotcha.
And so we had 3 levels essentially. You had beginner, intermediate, and advanced. Which is what we had at the Annoyance. There were just the 3 levels.
Okay.
At the Annoyance, and I think to a certain extent to our place, and this is sometimes to your detriment, like those classes were like were oriented around people as opposed to like called beginner, middle, or end. Like at the Annoyance, it was like, oh, if you're just starting, take Mark's class. Oh, if you've been doing it for a while, take Joe Bill's class. If you been doing it for a long time, take Mick's class. We never really referred to it as beginner, intermediate, and advanced. And really, there was very few people who jumped right into mixed class like you had.
Yeah, it removes that whole beating yourself up because, people get that freshman mentality. Like, I just started, I like that as a philosophy. Yeah.
Cool. So we ended up running we ran the beginner class at least a good 6 times over the 2 years.
Okay.
And I think we really ran the whole program probably a total of 5 times. We probably had 5 iterations of it, because you're just starting them one after the other.
And I'm sure you had time to So two questions that I have to just kind of open it up, because before we talk about the unfortunate ending of the Inferno, I just want to talk about like what were the highlights for you, Dan, in the time that it was up and running. Like what were some of the biggest successes just in the show or the community, and being able to build up the things that you were looking forward to and having a theater.
One of the things I really like, one of the sparkling moments for me, and there's a bunch. I mean, and honestly, like, even though it was only 2 years, like, everyone can kiss my ass, because there's all these people who didn't do it.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. All these guys who never, like, talked a good game and never started their own place. Yeah. And so it's like, yeah, I did it. It burned up. It cost me several thousand, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. But fuck, I did it. And so I always look at it as a positive thing, even though it was kind of brief. So my main partner at the thing, other than my wife, was my friend Sabrina, who is now down in New Orleans. And we came up through Second City together and did Annoyance together. And she was more of a writer. You know, I'm more of like a improviser director type, and she likes writing. And so, unbeknownst to me, she kind of was like, she got Lauren and Trish and a few of the other women involved in the Inferno. Christy Bonstall, I believe, was involved in it at that point. And they wrote a show. They did a sketch show of like women's sketches. And so before I know it, Sabrina's like, hey, we've got this sketch show ready to go. I'm like, all right, cool. Let's nuke the Thursday 10 p.m. show, and you guys can have that slot. And so they ran it there for a little bit. It was called The Ladies Show. And then we ended up, it was doing so good. I was like, man, let's just have this be the primetime show. You know, like, let's give this the 8 o'clock Friday, Saturday slot. Because it's good material. It's accessible to people. People are loving it. You know, you ladies have worked real hard to make a great show. So, you know, just seeing that kind of show spontaneously create itself was fantastic. There was another show that kind of spontaneously created itself that, you know, Brian Hatch got going, and PJ and Eric. What's Eric's last name?
Heilner?
Eric Heilner.
Yeah. Okay.
They all want.
When he did that, it made sense. Like, yeah, you know, Eric.
And honestly, like, that's no slight to anybody whose names I'm forgetting or terrible with. Like, I'm 52. I've done a lot of brain damage to myself.
Been what, 12 years, Dan?
It's been a long life.
But they got that show up. Sorry, it was PJ, Eric, and
yeah, they did this. They wanted to do a rap show, so we ended up doing this like wrap it up late night. Yeah, and the thing I loved about that was when you're talking about guys like Brian and Eric, especially at that point in their careers, like. These were guys who probably nobody else would have said, yeah, you can have a slot and you can have a dedicated weekly slot. You know, go nuts with it, guys. You know, I understand what you're trying to do. Let's make that happen. And so that was a real highlight. The other two things, you know, we did do stand-up on Sunday nights. We had an open mic stand-up on Sunday night. That was purely an economic move to just try to capture some additional drinks and that kind of stuff and capture an additional crowd. You know, get us exposed to the... You know, because there was a stand-up club in town, so I wanted to kind of steal a little of their audience. But one night, Pat and Oswald, Eugene Merman, and Brian Posen all came in. They had done a show in Detroit on Saturday, and we're doing a show in Ann Arbor on Monday. And so they just wandered into our open mic on Sunday. And, you know, Pat and Oswald went up and did like 5 minutes at the open mic.
Wow.
It was crazy, you know.
That's incredible.
And then we had the guys. We had the guys from the 313
cool.
come and perform for us a couple of times, which is, you know, Keegan Michael Key, you know, all those big Detroiter folks out there. You know, Larry Campbell,
Josh Naima Funk.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
The Funks.
Mark Evan Jackson.
Mark Evan Jackson. Yeah.
Mary Beth Monroe. Yeah. Cool.
It was.
So 313 crowd was already out in LA, and they were already 313 doing their thing out there.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And then I ran into them when I first moved to town. Like, literally the first night I went out in town here, I went to an improv show and they were there. And, you know, I started talking to them. They're like, you have your own place? I'm like, yeah, you guys should come perform. I'm like, well, let's make that happen. And we made it happen. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. And then, really near the end, it was pretty cool because I got a chance to direct Eye Candy, which was the group with PJ, Chris, Adam Peacock, and Tim Robinson. And so to have a chance to work with Tim Robinson was flipping great. You talk about a guy who's willing to take direction and is really committed to getting better all the time. Like, that's Tim in a nutshell. Same thing with Sam. I worked with Sam for a little bit. We were on a show together. We did this improvised superhero show that Sam and I were in together. Yeah.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah, that was great.
Yeah.
You guys used to dress up as superheroes and everything. That was, oh my God, that was so cool.
Stupid.
Yes.
It was awesome.
I love it.
But Sam could not have been a more giving person. Sam could not have been a better person. So. Those were the highlights, were the people I got to work with, but also seeing if I gave people freedom and creativity, seeing what they came up with, and they came up with some great stuff.
Well, there was also the MILF, which was my first festival, and it was so much fun. My first improv festival, that was all Dan. Yeah.
I mean, I could do an entire podcast for you on the business of it and how to make your theater run better. But I mean, two of the things that I quickly will say: drink specials and an improv festival.
Hell yeah.
Until we put a card on the table, and I told PJ this when he was starting to go, because PJ and I sat down with PJ, Chris, and Tommy, and we had a conversation. I was like, drink specials, guys. Because the day we put drink specials on the table, we started selling $8 chocolate martinis, and we couldn't keep the chocolate vodka stocked, So the 6 months before that, we sold one bottle of chocolate, stuff. After we did the drink specials, we're selling 6 bottles a day.
Yeah.
6 bottles a week. So
Echo Comedy.
Drink specials and an improv festival.
Yeah.
That's what you need to survive.
Nutella teenies during the holiday season fly. So let me ask you about where Inferno comes to a close, because as far as I know, having heard the story a couple times, it's really something that was out of your control with the landlord. Is that right?
That's right. And and much love to the Pointless people, but when they first got going, there was a reference in their press release or something where like, oh yeah, we had talked to the Improv Inferno people, and I guess they closed because there was some sort of management dispute. And I was like, you never talked to me, and we did not close because of a management dispute. But other than that, best of luck, fellas. But what really happened was I did not do enough research on our landlord. And our landlord kind of owned a bunch of properties on Main Street in Ann Arbor. He's dead now, so I don't have to worry about him suing me for libel. But basically what he did was he was kind of in this own and hold position where he would hold these properties. If somebody came along and wanted to rent them out for a couple years, he'd do that. But then he didn't want anyone renting it for too long because then his taxes would go up. Because now he's having to pay taxes on the rent. He's having to pay higher property taxes because now the property's being used. So, I talked about earlier how we had a hockey place. Well, that's why the hockey place never opened. He never gave him a chance to open. It was kind of like, oh yeah, you guys can open. And then it's like, so because if you let it sit too long, then they get mad at you. The town fathers get mad at you. But he had this pattern of basically just recycling places.
Gotcha.
And so we were getting near the end of the second year, and we had a 2-year lease. And he's like, yeah, you guys are doing great here. And we were doing great. We had introduced the drink specials. We had the festival, yada, yada. He's like, yeah, I want to double your rent, And keep in mind, we were paying him probably about $3,600 a month already. So that would go to $7,200 a month. And this is back in 2004, 2006. And on top of that, we were already paying him like 50% of what we made off the bar. So I basically told him, like, look, there's no way we can afford that. And he's like, well, then you got to get out. I'm like, okay, then I guess we're getting out. You know what I mean? It was right, it was like right after MILF when I first got the news. And, we had probably about 4 to 6 weeks to kind of shut the place down. And yeah, it was just really a matter of not being able to kind of sustain that rent. Now, obviously, I had been approached by some folks about like, hey, what if we invested in, the whole Live at PJ's thing where we went for a year. honestly, I was just at a point in my life where I had kind of done it, and I had this baby at home, and I was having to get back to the real world. So it's like, I probably could have continued it in some sort of format. I could have continued it with some sort of investment. But at that point, I had kind of like, I'd been there, done that, and I was, I considered it a mixed blessing that I kind of got taken out right at the top.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, it'd probably be either it'd probably be time to start handing it off to like primary management or artistic director to help you take the bulk of the responsibilities anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can imagine getting it up and running for 2 years. Like those first couple of years for a business are the hardest to just like get everything up. To imagine like trying to start over with that at a new location or like rebound at a time when you have a kid is like, yeah, it's unimaginable. Of course.
And it costs you way more to build out a space than you would think if you're going to do it right.
Yeah.
I mean, it cost us probably about $50,000-$60,000 to build out the space.
Wow.
When you're talking about, getting all the, the barware and building the stage and getting the lights and getting the light system. I mean, when we went in there, the place had no light system, so we had to have electricians, all that stuff. So, yeah.
And speaking of some of the build out and the equipment that you had, if I'm remembering correct, a lot of that stuff ended up being repurposed to Go Comedy, right?
Yeah, it was pretty cool because, Gerald, who unfortunately is no longer with us, he had talked to me at one point about like, hey, if you need investors, and I was like, I hate working for other people, so I knew that wouldn't work.
Yeah.
Even somebody as cool as Gerald. But, then PJ got in touch with me and he's like, hey, we're thinking of starting a place. What do you think? And I'm like, yeah, that's fantastic. So we kind of sat down and talked and I was like, here's the stuff I've got. I've got some lights. I've got this, a bunch of equipment. And he's like, yeah, we'll buy it. So, honestly, I mean, I think there are times where it's like, that was very generous of those guys to buy all my shitty equipment. They on some level, they bailed me out there,
Well, because it was things like the bar stools or some of the lighting tracks, and I remember if I'm right about this, the original
glasses,
Go
the
Comedy
glassware?
stand.
Yeah, the original podium,
Yeah.
which I think now they use for taking tickets. Hopefully, it's still over there.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, it's in the vestibule. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not the
I got
vestibule,
that when we
it's
did the original Damnation game in Chicago. I got that from a guy who had done a show with a preacher in it. And so if you look carefully at that stand, it actually does have a cross on the front.
Oh, really?
But then I spray painted it
Never
black.
noticed
And,
that.
and then when we were doing the show in Chicago, I hung the Damnation game sign over the front of the cross. So. But yeah, I mean, for the longest time, like their bar stools, their cash registers, that stand, those were all Improv Inferno relics.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and very cool that carried over because I remember finding that out and just thinking it was cool to I just put myself in your shoes just to have a little piece of the place from the Inferno live on in another improv theater.
Absolutely.
It's very cool.
Yeah. I mean, in a lot of ways, like you could make the argument that Go Comedy was the best thing to come out of the Improv Inferno.
Yeah, I mean, if
out of the Improv
especially
Inferno's closing, certainly.
Yeah, out of that in the same
that's fair.
same time, Second City going away with the final nail in the coffin for them too is like it was the Inferno talent and your experience opening up a theater and even things like the equipment and the knickknacks that went there really fueled Go Comedy being able to launch in a successful way to the degree that it did.
Yeah.
So if we have you for a little bit more time here, Dan, I would love to talk about a little bit more about your playing style, your philosophy style, and your directing style. Because the way that you and I met is that you had taken a break from improv for a while, and then I can't remember what year it was, maybe 2000,
14? 12,
yeah, maybe
13, 14, somewhere in there?
somewhere in there. But you approached PJ about directing a show at Go Comedy, and that show ended up being called The Cowards, and I was lucky enough to be part of that cast, and that show really came from me at a time when I was maybe like 3 or 4 years into improvising, and which is really excitable. And the Cowards experience for me like kind of took me to a next level of challenge and possibilities, which was really cool. So I was kind of curious if I might be able to pick your brain about what you had in mind with the Cowards and how it relates to your general philosophy as a director and artistic mind.
Yeah, one of the bad habits I have as a director is I'll get half an idea for a show in my head, and then like I'll keep that idea floating around in the back of my head, and it's like, okay, if this fits, maybe it'll work. And so one of the things I wanted to achieve with the Cowards, just from a back of the head idea kind of thing, was to really kind of show the audience like how we were incorporating suggestions, to kind of like underline that a little bit more. So to be able to do a long form show where you take a bunch of suggestions right up front and then just do the long form show. And then we had that whiteboard that we used to write down the suggestions so people could see like, oh yeah, somebody did say apple way at the start of the show. Yeah. And, so, I mean, that was like a half-baked idea I had, and so it wasn't like, oh, we got to go do this. But I was like, once I started working with the cast, I was like, okay, these guys are flexible enough. These guys are adept enough. These folks can kind of run fast enough and play hard enough that we can do this kind of format where they're grabbing stuff on the fly, and where, to a certain extent, and, we really got into this during the later part of the run with the Cowards, my goal was always for you guys to be challenging each other and pushing each other. When PJ approached me about like, hey, I'd love to have you come back and, teach. And I was like, and I did teach for a little bit. And, honestly, like, it's like having done it myself, having owned the place myself, like everything else, I don't want to say it just doesn't feel like a step forward. It feels like me trying to recapture lost glory.
Sure.
And I've seen way too many of those improv guys in their 50s getting drunk and trying to pick up the improv students in their 20s. And I never wanted to be that guy. And so, like, that's kind of why I was like, yeah, I came back, did the Cowards, and then I kind of faded out again. But yeah, I just really, you guys were you had great energy, and I just wanted to kind of show you guys what you were capable of. And so really, when I come into a directing process, my goal is, all right, how can I make these folks better? And that's a terrible way of putting it.
That's a great, yeah.
Right? I mean,
that's an amazing thing to want out of your.
Well, but
considering what the opposite could be.
Yeah. I guess my point is like it puts too much agency on me. Like I'm illuminating a path for the people. I'm trying to guide them to getting better. It's not like I can make them better. Okay.
Yeah.
But I mean, because I'm a pretty straightforward kind of guy, but I'm also not like, I've got the good combination of like being perceived as an asshole and also super nice, So I can bluntly tell you, like, yeah, that was a weird choice, and that was bizarre when you bailed on that scene. But at the same time, I can also kind of perk you up and make you feel like, oh yeah, like, so nobody ever feels too negative with the criticism. People feel like, oh, okay, yeah. I've got the hook to push forward, Well,
you used the word integrity a few times during this conversation, and I think that's why your notes work so well. They may be blunt, but you are always not always blunt, but you're always honest. So that you have the integrity of like, this is coming from a good place. I'm just telling you what I see. Please take the note, So I think that's what that's why it's so easy to take, even if it hurts, the note.
Well, that's one of the things I picked up from Mick Napier and his approach to directing. And he really did, when he directed a lot of the Second City main stage shows, his goal, he said, he went into the start and he said, our goal is not to have fun during this rehearsal process. Our goal is for you guys to have the best possible opening night. And I thought that was pretty cool, and that stuck with me. I tend to err on the side of fun, so I'm not as good at it as Mick is in terms of like, just grinding it out. But it really is about, when I approach any show, I'm like, okay, where are the gems in these people that I can point out to them and get them kind of polished up? What are the things that they do well that if they realize they do well, they could bring to the surface? Because I think once you have improvisers who have been doing it for a while, they find the stuff that works and they stick with the stuff that works. But that may not be the stuff that's working the best. That may not be the stuff that gives them the maximum flexibility and freedom. Mm-hmm. And so, even when I was working with Tim, I was able to kind of point out a couple things where it's like, hey, you're making this move a lot as kind of a secondary move, and that really should be your primary move. You're getting into the scene and this other thing is coming up for you. You're kind of introducing this new energy, but what if you move that to the start of the scene? What if the thing that you think is worthless that you're just kind of burying in as an extra little trick is actually your thing? Yeah.
And so when you're directing versus teaching, you're kind of like, I don't know, how much of a difference is there for you when you're teaching versus directing? Because I feel like for what you're talking about with Tim or the work you were doing with the Cowards, that there's a little bit more of a challenge element, as much as it is still about finding what you're doing well and what you see happening and still wanting to nourish that. I feel like the notes that I know that I've gotten from you or that I remember being in the Cowards are different from the notes that I remember students who, when you were teaching for a little bit, would tell me about getting, and there's just a different hue to them. And I'm curious for you what kind of how you distinguish between teaching and directing.
So when somebody comes and says, teach me something, it's kind of, you're given kind of a sacred honor at that point that someone is saying, hey, I want to learn this. And so your job as a teacher is to do your best to teach them that, to help them learn it, and so there's much more gentleness. There's much more kind of pulling people forward. And it's also, I never think of classes in terms of performance quality. It's more just kind of polishing those particular skills so that it can eventually get to a performance quality if that's where the student wants to go with it. But you in a class, you're kind of you're very positive about anything good that happens, and you're trying to raise all the boats together. You're trying to make sure everybody in class is having a good moment each day and moving forward. With a director role, when someone says, hey, I want you to direct my show, or I say to somebody, hey, I want you to be in my show, then really what we're saying is we want to create something together that is performance worthy. We want to create something together that is worth charging an audience for. And I think that, honestly, when you charge somebody for something, you owe it to them to give them the best damn show you can. I have seen some shitty improv shows, and they are shitty because they're lazy. I don't care if you're talented or not, but you better be doing your absolute best, because that son of a bitch just gave you $5 to see your show, right? So when we get into a directing process, that's what I'm more like. It's how are we going to create something that we're going to be very proud of when it opens? And so there I'll be much more direct, blunt, and whereas in a class, I'm trying to teach everybody a certain skill, in any particular session, 2 or 3 skills I might be trying to teach them. When you get into director mode, it's okay, let's work on this particular part of the show again and again. Let's work on our transitions again and again. Or I noticed that a couple people are struggling with a certain thing, and so I'm going to come up with an exercise on the spot or pull one from my memory to kind of attack that thing. So, with a class, you've got certain places you want them to get to, and with a show, you've got one place you want them to get to, which is an awesome opening night.
Yeah, and I remember you saying that my goal is for you to have a kick-ass opening night. And it was very fun, the stuff we were doing, but it always felt very on schedule. And I remember we were rehearsing on, it was definitely Thursday nights at 10 p.m. Because I also remember you saying that the reason, you had to work rehearsals around classes, which end at 10. And the reason you chose Thursdays is because being a 10 p.m. rehearsal, you can phone in a Friday. It's harder to phone in a Tuesday or a Wednesday,
right?
If you're going to be out that late doing it. But the rehearsals always started right on time. At 10 o'clock, you'd shut the door, and sometimes without even just being how's everybody doing, just be like, all right, so today, this is what we're working on, and we would get up and do it. And that's a group of 8 people, and it was it's hard to get people to commit and be there on time and be there in full attendance. And I think that your, I guess, for lack of a better term, strictness with starting on time and keeping a plan and being prepared with everything made us want to commit more as well.
Yeah, if you really commit, it's important that you as a director commit to the overall process so that you get your actors committing to the overall process. You know?
Yeah.
Because if you're phoning in rehearsals, they will phone in rehearsals.
Yeah, you set the bar.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and another thing I really loved about the process was that by the time we were ready to do the show, we were talking about like attire, and you were saying if you were a rock star in your own right, whatever that means to you, you are a celebrity level rocker. How would you dress, but casually? like if you're a rock star, but what's your casual dress?
Yeah.
So you look cool and put together, but it's still a little more relaxed than a formal event, And I thought that was so cool.
You're not wearing your Kiss makeup.
Yeah.
Right.
I just thought it
I
was
really felt like, and part of the reason for that, with regard to the cowards in particular, was I really wanted you guys to realize how much you were the rock stars of Go Comedy at that time. I'm sure there are new rock stars there now, and some rock stars never fade. Travis and Joe, be there forever.
Absolutely.
But I just really wanted you guys to experience what that was like to elevate yourself and to make the choice to elevate yourself, and almost to make the choice to elevate yourself as a person, not just as a performer. So it's like, you guys are awesome. This is your chance to go out and do an awesome show. Dress in the way that you would choose to dress if you had freedom. If you had that kind of freedom that a rock star has, that kind of, in your face ballsiness of rock stars, I put on my mom's dress and a pair of flip flops and I'm ready to rock and roll. Like, okay, cool. There's an elevation that happens there when it becomes a choice.
Yeah. And it made me, one, as a smaller thing, it's like it gives an aesthetic to the show that isn't overwhelming or shticky, but gets people having a vibe without demanding too much. And I thought it was just a really nice balanced way to do that. But then, on that like deeper level, it made me think like how do I want to present myself? Like what is cool for me? And if I can express that, what is who am I? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it was also, it wasn't like, you also didn't like make it this heavy, deep thing. You just kind of like, it's this little thing that you get to choose, and it is freedom, and it's about aesthetic and being a performer. And it totally made me look at like how I'm presenting myself on stage and what my personal aesthetic is, as opposed to like what I'm supposed to wear for any given show,
Yeah. And I don't think people think enough about that in terms of just like, how do you want to present yourself on stage? I don't think people think enough about it in terms of life. But then, I mean, you can tell I'm sitting here with a bow tie on. I'm a big believer in costumes.
Yeah.
So when I was in Chicago doing everything, like, and even when I first moved here with the Inferno, like, I was the guy wearing all those crazy party shirts with fire on them. I look like Guy Fieri, which was cool for a smidge of time. But again, I was trying to like, there was this guy in Chicago who was a known improviser, and he wasn't necessarily that great, but he did get a lot of parts and TV and that kind of stuff. And his name was Monte, Monte.
Okay.
Big, bald, heavy guy. And he wore shorts all the time. He was one of those heavy guys who wear shorts all the time. And so his uniform was a pair of black shorts and a t-shirt that said Monteism on it. So like, it looked like monotheism, but it was Monteism. And Monte had those shirts, and that was his uniform. And he became a character, like to the point where people recognized him. And I think to a certain extent, it's like, all right, I need to like, if you're going to cultivate an image, if you're going to be on stage a lot, you need to kind of cultivate that like image of like, here's the accelerated version of myself. Here's the outgoing version of myself. Here's the part of me that's not ashamed to get up on stage and be an idiot.
Yeah, embracing it's that because we're always talking about there's a lot of negatives associated with appearance obsession, but there's a lot of really positive things that can be thrown to the wayside if we don't think about it at all. And so, putting that positive quality on how you're presenting yourself was very cool. I appreciated it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, in a world where there's so many things out of your control that beats you up, like this is one thing you absolutely no one can tell you what to do. Like just dressing yourself, something that simple, and taking pride in that. It's got to give you a little boost.
Yeah.
And so, last thing before we wrap up is just to kind of paint a picture of what the show was for those other aesthetic elements. Is that it was an hour-long show, and you brought in these. What do you call it? Like it's whiteboard.
The fathead
sticker paper. Yeah.
Yeah, it's basically it's a sticker whiteboard. It's a stick-up and removable whiteboard. And so you brought in a couple rolls of it, and we would roll it up on the walls on either side of the archway on the Go stage, and take suggestions from the audience and write them up there, kind of gym game style, but just any suggestions as opposed to having like quadrants. Then show would start, or throughout the whole show, all the suggestions are up there, and like you said, it's about showing the audience or lightly reminding them that like, hey, remember, we're deep into the show, but like you can kind of scan the board and be like, oh yeah, shit, this is what this one's about, the gazelle. Right.
And then you also had us do these edits, which were overlap edits, where whatever scene was on stage. Instead of having a back line or sidelines on stage, the cast that wasn't in a scene would be out in the house, in the back of the house, hanging out in the house of the theater. And then if you wanted to initiate a scene, you would, instead of making a hard edit, make an overlap edit where two improvisers would make their way up to the stage and start their scene while the scene on stage kept going, and then the two scenes would be on stage at the same time until the oldest one would find its conclusion and then fade off, and then this next scene would be the only scene on stage, the new scene on stage. So those are really cool aesthetics, and I just want to maybe get your thoughts on how you think about using those types of elements in a show to kind of dress it up or fill it out more especially for an hour-long feature.
Yeah, I think, what I've seen a lot of shows, degrade themselves into or decay into is really what I'm trying to say. Are just kind of like, we're just, it becomes a jam. It becomes a fuck around. It becomes a set, as we sometimes call it. Like, yeah, we're just going to do a set. But really, like, the thing that bothered me about the Improv Olympic philosophy is like they think everything's a herald, everything is this one structure, and anything that has structure is just derivative of their one structure. I believe structure has been kind of inherent in dramatic forms since like the Greeks.
Sure.
So you're not really inventing too much there. But what you really like, in order to have a form, you just have to have an agreed upon set of rules. Like here are things that are legit to do, and here are things that are not legit to do. And most of those things, when it comes to forms, are the things about transitions, placement of other people on stage, that kind of stuff. So like we agree, here's how we're going to edit scenes. We agree, here's how we're going to position ourselves. If you build your form around those types of structures, you can end up with a really cool form that ultimately has some kind of like uniqueness to it. What I was really trying to achieve with those overlap edits were a couple things. One, I just wanted to kind of see that extra acceleration of energy into a scene. Mm-hmm. And frankly, for a long time, like when it just comes to scenes in general, I'm just obsessed with this idea of everything taking place contemporaneously, very close in time to each other. Very much like the movie Slacker, like the Jim Jarmusch movies, where it's like you just follow You know, you follow you're not following any person down a street. You're just walking down a street and you're hearing this story, then you're hearing that story, then you're hearing this story, you know. Because in the hands of good improvisers, that type of stuff, all of a sudden themes start to emerge, and then the show develops like this real universality about it, you know.
Yeah.
And I think we were pretty successful with that. I mean, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like it was definitely a territory for us to grow and develop in, but I think that made it yielded really great things in the shows. And again, I think speak for myself, but I have to imagine that everybody involved in that show took away a lot of things that resonated with them for their ongoing development. So because what you're talking about, that universality and things like Slacker and where themes come from in form, and how form can be used to have this greater purpose or picture for a show, that is definitely something that I have carried from that type of process and put into the shows that I've worked on since then, and aim to achieve those same goals.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great point to end it on, and I think I made a great point there. So
yeah, you
we'll
sure
end it
did.
there.
You sure did. Well, I do say so myself.
James, me and Dan were so happy to have you on our show.
So, James, if people want to get in touch with you, where would they reach out to?
What I mean to say is that I think that's a great sentiment to end on, which is that the Inferno and your presence in the improv community has carried on in really fantastic ways, and I know that I always bring you up as a reference point for a lot of the things that I'm working on. So I thank you for sharing the story about the Inferno, and I know that if I were somebody at this time coming up in the last couple of years and kind of wondering about the history of the community that I'm in, that this would be really, really exciting for me to learn about. And I don't think that we incorporate it into the, sometimes it gets lost in the cracks of Metro Detroit improv history. So really cool of you to take the time and share, and as well as your philosophy and everything. You, Dan, as our guest, where can people find the things that you're doing, and what any kind of plugs that you want to put out there?
Yeah, I like really the best place to track me down is on Facebook. I've got a really public feed. What I'm doing right now is I'm a real estate agent, so anybody in Metro Detroit who's looking for a house, please give me a call. I'm actually working with like a half a dozen improvisers right now, so that's pretty wild. It's wild to think of improvisers owning property, really, is what the wild part is.
We used to just own one property and all stayed there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the one house with 6 rooms. Yeah. But no, really, like, I love talking about this stuff. I love helping people. So certainly if anybody has any questions, you can reach out to me, dan@danizzo.com, or like I said, you can find me on Facebook. I think I'm danizzo1 on Facebook, like facebook.com/danizzo1.
Just a second, Dan Izzo?
Yeah, that sucks.
All right. Well, awesome. Thanks again, Dan. Really, really great to check in with you. I'm glad you're doing well.
Talking to you. Yeah.
It was good seeing you guys too. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Absolutely.
Thank you,
We'll catch you next time on Improv FAQ at Length.